guys are going to love this, some of you are going to hate it, and a few of you are going to lose your minds in the comments and let me know that you are officially done with this build, but that's okay. I am stoked. We finally have our rear wing from RSFuture. This is by far the biggest change to the outside of the car since we put the body kit on, and it's finally taking shape the way I see this whole thing in my head, and I am so stoked. I can't wait for you guys to see the way that this thing looks. Now in this episode, I want to get the rear wing positioned where we want it, and then I want to build some temporary mock-up uprights to hold it in place. We'll take the geometry from those uprights, design them in CAD, and send them out to get cut from Send Cut Send. And then that means we need to cut some big old holes and slots in our old school carbon fiber engine cover so the whole thing fits together, and there's no going back if I mess that up. So fingers crossed, I get it right. Let's dive in. This is going to be sick. I've filmed a lot of beauty shots of different car parts at this point, and shooting a wing is definitely the most difficult one so far, but thankfully the RSFuture carbon wing is here and it looks good on its own. And needless to say, it's absolutely massive and tips the scales at only just a couple of pounds. Now for a bit of a rundown, RSFuture is run by my friend Amir Benetu. He's also responsible for building this Turbo K20 NSX, and it happens to be one of the fastest street-class time attack cars on planet Earth. The car acts as his development platform for aerodynamic components, and his insane lap times on courses all along the West Coast and throughout the United States back up everything he's learned so far, and that's why I enlisted his help to build the aerodynamic components for the 308. His rear wing should develop about 800 pounds of downforce, so let's get it installed in the car. In order to mock it up, I turned to some of the most powerful tools in the shop. Good old cardboard boxes. Using them, I was able to get the wing positioned at least roughly where I think it should be. I spent more time than I'd like to admit digesting exactly where that should be, and ultimately I know we'll have to revise this in order to increase aerodynamic efficiency, but I'll bring Amir in to help with that later down the line. For now, I'm just going to take a stab at it. But in order to actually design a mount to hold it up, we've got to remove the end plates. It'll give us much better access to see everything from the side so we can design a paper template and build it out of aluminum. Now because this is only for mock-up purposes, I'm not really worried about how this is going to look. I just want to build something that will bridge the gap between our base mount and the wing itself so that we can actually bolt it into place. So a simple sheet of aluminum should do the trick, and a single two-dimensional template will allow us to build it. We need to punch some holes in the template, so here's a bit of a hack that I use from time to time. I've got this box of old sockets I no longer use, and sockets can make fantastic hole punches of any size. I simply bevel the end on my belt grinder, and then tap it using the closest large metal object. It'll punch a perfect hole in pretty much any template material and allow you to transfer them nicely if you don't have a set of transfer punches like me. With that, we can trace it out, cut it out, and hopefully bolt it to the car. My first attempt at the mount did indeed bolt up and supported the wing correctly. However, after I stepped back, I realized the wing wasn't sitting quite where I thought that it should. So I revised the design several times over in order to get the wing sitting where I wanted it. I bolted the uprights to the wing itself in order to make installation easier, and then after a bit of finagling, I had the wing mounted to the car for the very first time. Now there is a lot more to getting this right than just bolting the wing into place. We need to make sure that the wing is centered on the chassis. And ensuring that requires making a lot of measurements and a lot of minor adjustments, loosening bolts and moving everything just a little bit until everything is exactly where I want it. Now we need to have it centered for obvious aesthetic reasons, but also because we need to put some notches into our carbon fiber engine cover. This thing fell into my lap all the way back at the beginning of the build, and it was made sometime in the mid-90s, making it a rather old and somewhat irreplaceable piece. The concept at hand is to add some slots so that the engine cover can be removed without removing the rear wing. Otherwise, serviceability would be a huge headache. Because these cuts are going to be very visible from the outside of the car, I also want to make sure they are accurate and tidy. So we're going to use lasers to get it right. Using a laser level, I'm projecting a line directly over the top of our base uprights, and this is going to allow us to make a very accurate and clean cut in the engine cover itself. It took quite a bit of setup time to get the engine cover, the car, the wing uprights, and the laser all true to each other, but with any luck, this will be laser accurate. So it's the next morning. I've been here for an hour or so. I've got the engine cover on some stands, and I'm just kind of going over all the measurements, kind of checking everything, because you kind of only get one shot at this. Technically, composites are repairable. If I really screw this up, it's savable, but I'd rather not screw it up. But the problem that I'm facing right now is I don't know whether to trust the laser or whether to trust measurements. They're telling me slightly different things. And I really don't want to have my wing uprights not centered in my holes. I also don't know for certain that the car is like fully square. It's a hand-built car, so I probably shouldn't trust the body, nor should I trust this custom engine cover that was made 20, 30, 40 years ago, I don't know when, as being all that true. So, I don't know. This is a tough one. I don't know for certain that I have my like base uprights in the car square, perfect and what have you, so I could be introducing an error that turns into 3/8 of an inch once we're talking about a foot in on the engine cover. I don't know. You guys will see what I decide here in a moment, I guess. I decided to trust my gut and my eyeball, and of course the measurements, because I figured there's a lot of variables in that laser setup, and it would be really easy to introduce a small error. That's not to say it wasn't worthwhile, though. In fact, it was immensely helpful in making sure this is going to turn out the way that I want. With everything marked out, I drilled some pilot holes and then punched everything out to a 1/2 inch in overall diameter. Ideally, this will be our overall cut width. So I used some tape and ran some tape lines to the back of the deck lid for us to run an angle grinder along. As long as I'm accurate with a cutoff wheel, this shouldn't require much cleanup after we're done. Thanks to the comments section, I have learned that cutting carbon fiber is terrible for your lungs, so I'm wearing the best mask I've got in the shop, and hopefully it's good enough. I've also got gloves and long sleeves on to try to keep the particles from irritating my skin, and we'll have to see how that works out for the long term. Alright, so my cuts came out pretty good. I left just the tiniest edge there. And fortunately not as much sag as I was expecting, because we do have this structure here, and then in the middle there is still a center structure to help support, so I was expecting some deflection here, but that should work. We can figure out how to support all this on the car with some mounts. So let's peel our tape and see how we fared. Now, it was a good sign when the engine cover did slip into place right past the uprights, but I'll also say this is going to be a bit tricky to do solo once everything is painted. I'll have to figure out a way to get this hood on and off the car when the time comes. I'll definitely have to add a way to level out the back of this thing so that it all sits flush and correctly, and I'll need to come up with a solution for latches, as well as hood pins for the front of this thing so that the whole thing will work without the use of hinges. But overall, I think this thing is looking great. I haven't done any cleanup work to these cuts yet. These are still the ragged edges from the angle grinder, but our wing uprights still pierce them perfectly centered. There's still some alignment work to do at the front end of the engine cover, but overall, we're really shaping up. And last but not least, the wing itself is amazing. So after stepping back and getting a good look at this thing, the only rational option was to mock up our tires underneath to get a really good idea of what it's going to look like here in just a few weeks. Now, I've only got 2 rear tires to play with. These are 315/30 18s, but it's still a good idea of how this thing is going to fill out. I'm also really happy with how the big end plates dive down and cover the sides of the body as opposed to leaving a gap between the top of the car and the bottom of the end plate. Aesthetically, I'm in love with how this is taking shape, even if it is over the top. Now, if you've made it this far into the episode, you're probably not worried about it, but if you're watching and you're freaking out about this rear wing and you're thinking to yourself, man, I liked this car so much more before it had all this crazy aero on it, you're not alone. I like the way that the car looks with and without this aero. I bought a 308 because I love the way that it looks. I love its shape, I love its profile. And that is exactly why I designed the entire rear wing mount system the way that it is. Those uprights are split so that we can simply unbolt them, the entire rear wing comes off, and then hanging out up in the back corner of the shop is the original engine cover that we can bolt on that does not have slots cut in it. We can simply drop the splitter, the side skirts, and the diffuser, and we have a really cool street 308 with some awesome bodywork and what have you, but no crazy aero to worry about. With all that said, I'm pretty stoked on this aero. I've been losing my mind looking at this for the past 24 hours. I hope you guys are loving it too, because I can't believe how sick this thing is. I am so stoked. And on that note, I had to set the splitter up under the front of the car just to get an even better idea of how this thing's gonna look, and I am more excited for this thing to take shape than I have been at any point prior. I'm hopeful that we're going to have wheels pretty soon, which means before long, this will be a reality. And then it's time to get everything else mounted up, get those axles ordered, and get this project finished. So I know this has really mostly just been an episode dedicated to a wing and mounting it and modifying an engine cover, but there has been more progress than that behind the scenes. I spent most of the weekend getting all of your orders all packaged up and ready to ship out, and then I've been helping my buddy John on his V-Across. No, it's not mine. I got so many comments in the last episode freaking out about this thing, wondering if it's the next project, but no, it belongs to my buddy John, who owns the black 308 you've seen in here a bunch of times. He's doing front suspension, so I'm just lending a hand and giving him some space to work on it. But in and amongst that, I've also been hard at work designing a bunch of parts in CAD so we can get them cut and get this car put back down on the ground. That's really kind of the main focus right now, but I figured why not do an episode about this wing, because I'm amped about it. I'm pretty excited. Now, a few fun talking points while we're here at the end of the episode. The first is I took some rough measurements, and when this car is sitting on the ground, that rear wing, the top of it should come up to about an inch above my belly button. So this thing's gonna have a totally different presence once it's actually down on the ground. I can't wait to see that. It's just gonna be mind-blowing, I think. I hope you guys have been enjoying all of this aero. I know some of you won't, but you know what? You can't win them all. I think it's gonna look sick. In terms of the rear wing positioning, I know some of you guys are gonna say, hey, there's like some really important details on how to mount that thing and whatnot, and kind of where to get it positioned so the aerodynamics really work here. And you're not wrong. Upshot is, now that we've got kind of the whole geometry for our uprights, we can design as many of them as we want. We can get a bunch of them cut. The wing has adjustable attack angle. We can really get this thing to do whatever we want it to do, and I'm gonna ask some friends who really know what they're doing in order to help me maximize its use. But for now, I'm gonna mount it right there because I think it looks pretty good. And overall, that about wraps up the episode. That's a pretty good look at the overall aero package. We still have a lot of work to do. We're waiting on that rear diffuser, which is gonna be another like 8 weeks before we get it, but thankfully there's really no rush for it. We've got to do a lot of work on the front splitter. We've got to close up that gap between the air dam and the splitter itself. We've got to mount the side skirts, the flat bottom floor, blah, 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 blah. There's a ton of work to do, but I'm excited to do it. This thing really is finally taking shape for what I've had envisioned in my head this whole time. It's starting to look like those renders that I showed you guys at the very beginning. And honestly, I'm just so stoked. This is a dream come true for me. This car is really becoming the 308 I imagined. And I know not everybody's into that crazy aero and time attack look, but I hope that you guys can appreciate it nonetheless and see what I'm going for. I think it's looking pretty sick. With that said, I've got my work cut out for me for the end of the week, so I'm gonna get back to work. Thank you guys as always for the support. I'll catch you at the end of the week.